Hello, my name is Asun López Varela. I am professor at Universidad Complutense in Madrid, Spain. And I would like to thank Professor Iwasaki for inviting me to deliver this conference as part of her Eurasia Foundation program in University of Hawaii at Hilo. And I'm going to be talking to you about a friend of mine, actually, AnjanSen, whose poetry, it's part of this Bengal school, the Adunik school in Bengal, and which is an interesting way of exploring intermediate and intercultural aspects, the dialogue between the visual and writing. Part of this lecture was published in 2018 in a volume entitled India and its Visual Cultures by Sage Publishers. And I have permission for the reproduction of the images and the poems by AnjanSen. I encountered AnjanSen on a visit to India in 2011, and his poetry is characterized by a peculiar visuality expressed in words and imagined by the poet and his readers. And his poetic words are brought into a dialogue with illustrations by various visual artists. I was also surprised by his desire to be both author and object of interpretation, moving beyond the limits of author-critic relationships and the boundaries of intertext and intermediate forms of representation. You have some pictures there of myself in India with AnjanSen. He's a very tall man. His poems engage historical, mythical, and folk accounts to create a dialogical, intersubjective, intercultural, and intermediate sort of happening. So performance is very performative, no? So to me, his work serves to illustrate the richness and fluidity of Indian and Bengali artistic representations. Just as an introduction, to mention that there are two important artistic movements that have led West Bengal literary scene in recent years. One is the Hungry Generation, which was led by Malay Roy Choudhury and his brother Samir Roy Choudhury and other colleagues who you can see there in the picture. And the Hungry Generation derived the name from Geoffrey Chaucer's translation of The Consolation of Philosophy by Boethius. And the themes echo Western canon. And although some of them originate in Vedic cosmology, but many of the themes are connected to Western sources, no? The Hungry Generation was also inspired by Oswald Spengler's work, The Decline of the West, and it contemplates history as a kind of an organism undergoing several cycles, and Western modernism and postmodernism. So you have there some of the books that were published by this group of Bengali authors. Choudhury also translated William Blake, Arthur Rimbaud, Tristan Tzara, John Cocteau, many of Allen Ginsberg, many of the modernist and postmodernist Western authors into Bengali and also in Hindi. And this group, the Hungry Generation, published in magazines. One was called Hawa 49 and another one Kavita Bashik. And they followed this experimental, non-conformist, non-commercial outlook. The second group is the one that I'm going to be talking about, which is the Uttar Adhunik school. Is translated Beyond Modern, and it was initially led by Amitabh Gupta, whom you can see there, two images of himself young and a little bit older, and one of his books. And he unlike the Hungry Generation, which looked at the West, this movement looks back at Bengalese mythology and folklore, ballads and music, drawings, paintings, and tries to highlight the plurality of India and in Bengal. So the differences between these two movements simplifies poetically the ideological conflict between Western political approaches when referring to India as well. So as I mentioned, the Uttar Adhunik looks back at Bengali mythology and folklore, ballads, music, drawings, paintings, combining individual ideolect with a socialist that follows Indian traditions, and it contemplates authorship as a sort of a group activity and an intergender activity. So this is why AnjanSen engages in this dialogue with other artists, visual artists, and also critics like me, for example. No? So the lyrics and names and rhymes of these different Buddhist saint poets from Eastern India and Bengal are a source of inspiration, as well as a type of paintings which were called the Kaligat or Bidbum drawing paintings, which were early attempts to integrate artistic units in a series of compositions in which groups of artists, sometimes of succeeding generations, participated. So it was a co-creation activity. So here you have some examples of Kaligat painting, which derives the name from the ancient neighborhoods in Kolkata. And it developed in late 18th century and flourished during the reconstruction of this temple, the Kaligat temple, in 1809. And later also with the development of transport systems with the East India Company trade. They represented nouveau riche families or babus, and who were frequently the object of satire and involving carnival-like inversions of social order. You can see there that the man is looking after the wife, or the wife is beating the man up. So these caricatures were characteristics, and they also inspire some of the poems. Another source of inspiration was, of course, Rabindranath Tagore, a Nobel Prize, and who actually made this district of Kolkata his home. He established there his great center of learning, and it was an area that attracted many artists and painters and writers. And it's also an area that attracts markets and fairs, and where in these fairs the vendors they sing the stories, the local stories, in order to attract potential clients. Another source is the Ramayana, which is one of the popular continuing oral traditions, and it occupied an important part in the repertoire of these performances that were later also captured in poetry. So AnjanSen has described the Uttar Adhunik poetry not so much as a movement, but rather as a stirring, sort of a tone, an emotion, and also an anxiety, describing a desire to change. A critic, Udayanarayan Singh, has similarly referred to the movement as an attitude, poetic temperament, also technique, and also a world view. You have some of the books there by Sen. Unlike the postmodernists, the school of Uttar Adunik builds the edifice of life on the altar of humanistic essence, writes Sen, and quoting the founder of the movement, Gupta, the poet, the Gupta asked the younger poets to carry the fire of a new promise, to bring inspiration. So it's a poetry that remains very firmly entrenched also in the collective character of Indian culture. So one of the main themes in AnjanSen's poetry is time, represented through ebbs and tides and rivers. We will see. Some of the books by AnjanSen you can see there on your screen. He uses the idea of social subjectivity represented by Indian concepts as Kula and Sila. Person is introduced to his or her social world in terms of his Kula Sila. Kula is the heritage, the inheritance, but also in terms of biological, cultural, and tradition. And Kula is also translated as clan. So he's trying to emphasize this idea of individuality within the social context, and carrying particular obligations and challenges as well. So in these encounters, the person develops ideas, visions, methods, modes of creativity. This is Anjan's philosophy, as he explained to me when we met. The person becomes aware of this communal inheritance, the Kula, and responds and articulates this in particular ways, determining his or her Sila, her own individuality. So in order to bridge this gap between the Kula and the Sila, we also, which it can also be translated in terms of past and present of the community. Uttar Adunik poetry uses traditional myths as part of the contemporary history. So it puts myths, ancient myths, in the present moment. And myths are a very important unit in the poetic text, as part of the language of the group and the collective consciousness as well. In this movement, myths stage moral conflicts, such as the triumph of good over evil. In India, the gods, the devas, and the asura over the demons, the asuras. And this is one of AnjanSen's books on myth, literature, and culture. This is the list of differences that AnjanSen finds between the two movements, the Hungry Generation and the Bangla Uttar Adunik. I'm not going to go through them, but you can just look at them. And for example, the postmodern discontinuity, which is characteristic of the Hungry Generation, is not there in the Uttar Adunik, which uses natural speak, narration, and transitive writing. Is humanistic instead of dehumanizing, and as we have mentioned, myth is used to refer to concrete ideas. So rather than using the construction as in the Hungry Generation, the Uttar Adunik uses constructive techniques as well. we're going to look at some of Sen's poems. This one is entitled Stop You Traveler, Pathic. It's illustrated by the Mexican artist Diana Magallon. Stop you traveler, if you were born in Gourubanda, Banga, if you heard Padavali, Mangala, Panchali, Prasadi, Madhu, Ravindra, stop for a moment if you were born in the land of floods, drought, and good harvest. You'll say languages all around you, languages simmering inside you, Bangla Bhasha. Whenever you want to say my Bhasha, you're losing voice, hands, and tongue. Stop, traveler, stop for a moment. Say, hope is the mother tongue. So this poem is very much about multiplicity of language, and also, as we mentioned, about traveling and time passing, because it's one of the most important things in Anjan's poetry. The poem refers to the land of floods, good harvest. Gaurobanga refers to ancient Bengal, and Bhasha means language, and then all the different poetic forms from Bengal that are mentioned in the poem, Badavali, Mangala, Panchali. They're simmering inside of you, all part of this inherited past carried by the traveler in his movement. He's inspired here by this poem, Madhu, who these poetic forms from Madhusan Dutt, who is a 19th century poet, and also from by another poem called Prasadi by a poet and saint called Ramprasad Sen. And you have some pictures there of these two poets. AnjanSen on the right hand side at the gates of Kandagiri caves, which we visited together in Bhubaneswar in Orissa. And I am in the top offering a puja, which is a sort of a prayer in one of the temples there. The poetic subject of this poem asks the traveler to stop for a moment and recover his or her voice, and hope in the mother tongue, so again, this emphasis on Indian myths and traditions as a source of hope and freedom for this group of poets. The illustration of the poem also refers to the fact that by depicting a bird of heavy plumage flying into the sky. AnjanSen poem also refers to the traveling across time and space, which are elements in Bangladeshi poetry. We can also mention that the similarities that appear in Diana Magallon's illustration, where words seem to double and are overlaid by the image of a kind of grain-sheaf tray in the form of the sun, and the words Padavali, Mangala, Panchali, Prasadi, they circle on the top of the sheaf, as if bound with the periphery of the country and the time and the word. So this is a quotation from one of the critics on AnjanSen. Sen also refers to tradition as a cage in a way, and this is the term Achimpaki, unknown bird who is going to transcend this cage. This term refers to a famous song by another mystic figure, a rebel, also from the 18th century, Lalan Fakir, who sang the sufferings of the peasant folk of Bengal. Lalan is a key figure in the Baul tradition of Bengal, which constituted both a religious group and a musical tradition. And it was a great influence on Tagore and also on Allen Ginsberg, by the way. And Lalan did not believe in classes or castes and took a stand against racism. And this kind of culture was passed down entirely in oral form until very recently. So there are no historical records of their origins and influence. And they appear in the area of West Bengal and also in Bangladesh. And so the unknown bird, it's a phrase from a song by Lalan. So the image expresses this journey beyond things material, longing for this kind of oneness with the divine. The text of Lalan's songs follow tantric forms of meditation and engage with philosophical positions emanating from Hindu, Jainist, Buddhist, and also Islamic traditions. It's very multicultural. He sustains a discourse based on the power of music to alter intellectual and emotional states of the mind that led to great appreciation of life. No? So this syncretism is reflected in the image of the grain sheaf in Magajon's painting. No? All these cultures, mixing of all these cultures. The other influence, which we mentioned, AnjanSen, 18th century poet, wrote Bhakti poems known as Ramprasadi, usually addressed to the Hindu goddess Kali, who is worshipped in Bengal. And this poet was credited with a new composition form that combined Bengali folk style of Baul music and raga-based melodies of classical compositions. The devotional poems to Kali, to the goddess Kali, were also appear in relation to the famine that shook Bengal in 1770 and deteriorated rural culture. And this is a particular topic also in AnjanSen's poems. We have, for example, this poem, The Hunger, which expresses the need for a return to the mythical and the traditional, the necessity to stay hungry and dominate the capitalist desire to consume until everything is exhausted, including not only agriculture, but also creativity. No? So tell me, who will you eat and eat how much? That will make you fat as grampus. Fire in the large hearth does not quench, melts glass, molten iron, crops get burnt out. Even that will you lap up. Devour sweetness and its joy. Life becomes listless corpse as it corrodes. You'll eat corpse cadaver, you'll eat all, and will grow into a pile in the capital market, killing the disease over and over again. My hunger lies in his hidden tongue. Tell me, how much more will you eat? How much that make you immense? So, as I mentioned, traveling in time and space is a constant feature in AnjanSen's poems. The idea of life as a composition of opposites like fire and water that also meet. It's also present in many of his poems, and the idea of the local earth and the global universe becoming one. No, so where sweat mixes with the earthly rhythms and common speech, and this happens in his poem Chola Journey, which I'm going to try to play for you.
The journey, Chola. যে চলে তার পায়ে ফোটে ফুল, সমস্ত টান সমস্ত ভার টেনে নিয়ে চলে। চলতে চলতে ঘাম ঝরে পড়ে প্রপথে, ফুল ফোটে, দৃঢ় হয় তার চলা। কথন সড়কে বড় আলোড়ন, বড় কুটিলতা টানে, চমকে যায় থেমে, আবার চলে। চলতে চলতে কথা আগুন আর জল হয়ে যায় পৃথিবী আর মহাশূন্য। কথন চলে, লোক কথনের মৃত্তিকাময় চলা, শ্লোক হয়ে যায় চলে।
In English, chola sounds like this. Flowers bloom in the footsteps of one who goes, pulling away all attractions and burdens, and while going, sweat stains the chosen path. Flowers bloom, the journey becomes meaningful. A flurry in the path of a speech, oblique attractions started. One hesitates and goes again, and in going, words become fire and water, earth and universe. Speech continues, and the earthly rhythms of common speech become verses, going. Magajon's illustration of journey reminds us of a jigsaw puzzle of interlocking pieces that include both text and image. Frequently, her rendering of AnjanSen's texts are superimposed, creating a doubling that encourages an ambiguous reading. In this case, the doubling contributes to the illusion of movement, with the word going attracting attention. Puzzles, like life itself, require an ongoing process of inquiry and discovery, and their solution frequently lies in the recognition of patterns in a particular order. Although puzzles are now used as forms of entertainment, they originate in divination practices in ancient religions as a way to bridge past, present, and future, material and immaterial, or spiritual life. Magajon's illustration also shows a woman balancing a basket of fruits or cereals on her head, a practice that had existed since ancient times, and it is still a common practice in many parts of the world. AnjanSen has illustrated many of his poems and invited artists from diverse cultures to put images to his words, crossing the border between text and image, and employing different formats, not just illustrations, but also digital art forms like those used by the Mexican Diana Magajon, a bas relief, as seen in his poem Imagination, which was illustrated by sculptor Bimal Kundu. You will see it later in this lecture. This is a direct way of involving other artists into co-creation, making his work more open, public, intersubjective, and less private and individual, perhaps embodying McKimm's Marriott's notion of individuality, the individual as a relational nexus with all others. There are many references to rural life in AnjanSen's poem. In Crichere of agriculture, the use of vernacular terms such as ano, which means food, or dan, paddy, are reminiscent of folk life in West Bengal. They are found, for instance, in an old spell about denki, a wooden pedal used in husking rice, and these expressions enhance the awareness of the native soil in AnjanSen's poems. Below you have a replica of Crichere of agriculture. So many seeds grew into plants, so much gold was reaped. The farmers' daughters walk around the heaps of paddy, making the shrill ulu sound. The festival continues all morning, the dream of more ano after the dry soil again, no seed, no water. In Shravan, AnjanSen uses metaphors of harvest and fertility and puts them in relation with creativity, as he does in many other poems. Shravan is a mythological character in ancient Sanskrit epic Ramayana, notable for the devotion towards his parents. All as they were, they could not walk in pilgrimage to the sacred places, and Shravan carried them with the help of a bamboo stick on his shoulder and 2 baskets balanced at each end, where his parents were placed. You can see there the illustration of the poem Shravan, which was translated from Bengali by Amlan Dasgupta and illustrated again by Diana Magojon in 1989. I'm going to read first the poem in English, and then I will play AnjanSen's poem read in the original Bengali by himself, by AnjanSen. Shravan. The sky shivers with the swing of rains, the rain drip-drop drenching the visionary world. O grace, O thunderous grace, quench the cosmic thirst. In the rice field, the festival sun is on its only roots. The swing of the rains towards the rock, the pilgrims move, their shoulders heavy with the sacrosanct water. Pouring water, Shravan takes a shower. Once again, the son of desire for grain, the rock has been washed by many monsoons.
শ্রাবণ। এই শ্রাবণের দোলায় আকাশে কাঁপন লাগে, ঝরে জল ভিক্ষা বিশ্ব ভেজে। কি এ করুণা, হে বজ্র করুণা, ভূমার তিরাশা জুড়াও। শস্য খেতে ঝুলন চলেছে, শিকড়ে শালন জুয়া। জল ভার বেয়ে যাত্রীরা চলে, তাদের লক্ষ্যশিলা। জল ঢালা, এই শ্রাবণের স্নান, এই শ্রাবণের শস্য চাওয়ার গান। অনেক শ্রাবণ ধোয়া এই শিলা, জমাট বাঁধা শস্য।
Many festivals are celebrated during the month of Shravan, the 5th month of the Hindu year, which begins in late July and ends in the 3rd week of August, and is considered a holy month. During the festival known as Kamvar Yatra, a large number of people perform a ritual, puja, in which they carry water from the Ganges river on their shoulders, and they travel around 50 kilometers to offer this water to Lord Shiva in the local temples. The term Kamvar Yatra comes from kamvar, a pole usually made of bamboo, with 2 roughly equally loads fastened on opposite ends. The kamvar is carried by balancing the middle of the pole on one or both shoulders, as Shravan did with his parents. The term Amrita in Sanskrit refers to the holy water which is poured in the manner of baptism over Shiva's for purification, and this contributes to uplifts a person's physical and spiritual consciousness to a kind of a state of immortality. And similar traditions appear in Buddhism and in Sikhism. Shiva is considered in certain religions as the god of fertility and harvest. His image is often represented shaped in the form of a penis in a black stone called lingam. AnjanSen suggests that grain hardens and takes the form of a stone, becoming lingam. Thus, he posits a clear relation between fertility, harvest, reproduction, and creativity. In the myth of the eternal return, Romanian historian of religion, fiction writer and philosopher Mircea Eliade explained how many of these ancient agricultural and fertility rituals may have traveled from their original context, being translated and interpreted in new cultures. Interestingly, Eliade studied in Kolkata in the late 1920s. In this image, you have some illustrations referring to the festival Kamvar Yatra, which is celebrated in the month of Shravan, and the history of the pilgrimage associated with Shravan as well. And you have there a link to information about these festivals. According to Michel Liade, rituals around the world have many resemblances, possibly not just due to the fact of mutual influence, but also owing to the basic structures needed to maintain human life in Neolithic times. Grains stand as sources of food and energy and as symbols of new life and creativity, to the point of becoming the bread used in Christian communion, for example. Water stands for cleanliness, and for example in baptism, and also which also means new life in some religions, as we have seen. No? And water helps grain to grow properly on the land, just as food helps human physical and spiritual growth. Echoes of these rituals can be found in the Egyptian Book of the Dead and in ancient Celtic fertility rituals. And for more information, you can read The Golden Bough by Sir James Fraser, or From Ritual to Romance, which is another book which inspired, for example, the work of T.S. Eliot in The Wasteland, the poem. All these myths are related to a cyclic conception of time, in which the ritual is used at the end of the cycle in order to clean and prepare the land for a new start, and also used in the metaphorical sense where the land stands for the physical and spiritual human body. As Eliade explains, the cyclic ritualistic illo tempore conception of time, still welcomed in contemporary societies every new year, provides a sense of relief against the linear flux that ends in death. In most religions, after the apocalyptic moment of the end of physical time, life, there would be a possibility of return, either in the form of metempsychosis or reincarnation, in those religions believing in the separation of body and soul, or by means of a kind of final judgment day that would enable those who during their physical life have behaved well to reach heaven in resurrection. The entire month of Shravan is observed as one of fasting and eating vegetarian food. Heavy digestion is considered polluting, sluggish during this season, which, as we mentioned, it takes place in the middle of the monsoon. The month of Shravan also coincides with the Jain festival of Pariyushana, or the festival of forgiveness. Jainism emphasizes the degree of non-violence to various forms of life, and for this reason they are not only vegetarian, but many of them are vegan. Fasting has traditionally been a penance, a process of physical, emotional, and mental purification, and is accompanied by pursuing good thoughts, good words, and good deeds. Dietary restrictions include the proscription of root vegetables like potatoes, because eating them entails killing the entire plant, green leafy vegetables because they might harbor insect life, and sprouted seeds because they are germinating life. Diana Magajon's illustration of Shravan captures different aspects of this festival, and in the bottom right you can actually see the praying hands. The Uttar Adhunikata movement recognizes cultural continuity in its philosophical grounding, and it does not see distinct cultures as detached realities, but rather as a system of interrelations in continuous influx. The description reminds us again of Marriott's Individuals. The dynamic conception of the Uttar Adhunikata poetry understands temporal happenings as eternal recurrences, a continuous wave of states of being, which include past, present, and future simultaneously. And you have a reference there to a study on the movement by Amitabha Gupta. Time is experienced in its linearity, but also in its circularity, engaging the past in the form of folklore, ancient myths, vernacular language, and so on, as we have seen, with the present moment and projecting it into the future by means of performative actions, since many of these poems are designed to be sung or even danced and repeated in ritualistically in festivals. No? Linear time does not exist in Indian thought. The individual moment is contemplated in relation to eternity or timelessness. And since then, the reality of time is always set on the background of a space. Timeless time can only be thought within spaceless space, which is infinity. And you have a quotation there from Eliade. The great cosmic illusion is a hierophany. One is devoured by time, not because one lives in time, but because one believes in its reality, and therefore forgets or despises eternity. Eternity, the temporal dimension, and infinity, the spatial dimension, of humanity are, according to Indian traditions, in perpetual flux or change. Within this movement of rhythmic, song-like flow of time, the interrelatedness of the substances of which life is made of, earth, water, air, sky, and the psychological, that is affective and aesthetic, find a space in Anjan's poems. The feelings that such a vision enables are captured in the metaphor of the flowing and cleansing waters in his poems, many of them dealing with the river, as it's the case with the following poem, which is called Ganga or Flow. In this case, you can see that the illustrations are by a well-known artist, Ganesh Pine, which appear in AnjanSen's book, published in 1981. I'm going to read the poem first in English, and then you're going to be able to hear AnjanSen's recitation of the same poem. Flow. And flow goes on, standing rock deep in the holy river, the hibiscus sky. Where hast thou come, O river, the flowing locks of the destroyer, in mountains where the fire of the sky is cool? Water drenches the soil and soothes the eyes. Life flows on through the rain, and men discuss it as hope, and sing its praises, call the river their mother, sing hymns in their primal magical belief. Sky, rain, mountain, river, water, flowing.
ফ্লো, প্রবাহ, সেই প্রবহন চলে এক গলা গঙ্গা জলে জবা কুসুম আকাশ। নদী, তুমি কোথা হইতে আসিতেছ? পাহাড়ে মহাকালের জটা, আকাশে আগুন, ঠান্ডা হলে জল। মাটি সিক্ত হবে, চোখ জোড়াবে, বৃষ্টির মধ্য দিয়ে প্রাণ চলেছে। বর্ষণকে আশা ভেবে নিয়ে লোকে গান গেয়ে উঠল। নদীকে মায়ের মতো ভেবে বলে চলল স্তোত্র, প্রত্ন আদিম জাদু বিশ্বাসে। আকাশ, বৃষ্টি, পাহাড়, নদী, জলে চলে প্রবাহন চলে।
Here you have another poem which is called Holer of Water, and it deals with the Jamuna River, which is one of the Ganga's attributes. I don't know what is afloat, a corpse? The canoe sails on. It has become a skeleton, having drifted in the dark Jamuna, his heart distraught. The batman tows on. He keeps floating, walks the water. The river water swells, it stocks water and swigs all that it contains. In our 3/4 of water, this 1/4 land is visible. The water swirls around it. The sky, hills, farmland twirl, become seas. deluge. We're floating like fishes, propitiate us, O water, satiate. It sucks and swings water. The dark sea has a low tide now. You may have heard in the poem that it's also dealing with the river as a place of burial and also of a life after death. And for example, many burials take place in Varanasi, in the river Ganges or Ganga in India. And the Jamuna is the largest tributary of the Ganges and originates in the Yamunotri glacier in the uppermost region of the lower Himalayas, and its name literally means twins in Sanskrit because it runs parallel to the Ganges, as you can see there on your map. There are many Vedic stories that speak of the two rivers as brother and sister, and of Jamuna descending to meet her beloved Krishna and to purify the world. Her waters are dark blue, like Lord Krishna or Shiva, who at the time of creation and in the fight between the demons, the Asuras, and the semigods, Devas, inhale a poison that had been released into the ocean of milk or Milky Way during the Samudra Mantham. This story appears in the Mahabharata and it's known as the quest of the Amrit, also in the Ramayana. Together with water, fire is another symbol of purification and renewal, as a metaphor of the ashes that return to the physical matter, the soil, enabling new creation as part of the ever-flowing circle of life. So fire emphasizes the materiality of time, a trope present in many cultures, for instance the image of the phoenix rising from its ashes in Greek mythology. Fire appears in another of AnjanSen's poems, where the presence of fire and the pyres where the bodies are burnt in India, and the dormant burial ground, which is one of the terms he uses in the poem, indicate the cycle of both life, death, and creativity. And you have some illustrations there of the burial grounds in Varanasi. India of drought and Jamuna. Are the days pallid, or you can see only hazily? The enormous India, as much drought she begets, so much do her Jamuna inundate, as many scorching days it has, that many gloomy nights it has. Those who wanted the god of fire could see thousands of pyres, a dormant burial ground. A huge India, huge is her social information, very many soils, oppositions. I do not know any metaphor. O India, write for us a few new poems. I want nothing more than that, the boon to remain in the foreground. So we can see how AnjanSen appeals to the folklore and the traditions of India for inspiration, for creativity. And he plays with the union of opposites, water, fire, death, life, which are very much present in all his poems. No? In this one, Kalpana, imagination, he uses the Indian concept of Kalpai, which refers to the endless fulfillment of desire related to the mythical cycle of creation and destruction. The poem points back to Kalidasa's Sanskrit epic, in its desire to establish an interrelationship between myth, history, and poetry. And you have there the illustration of the poem by Bimal Kundu, a well-known sculpture, which is here reproduced with permission from the artist. No? The Kalmadruma or Kalpa tree roots the future firmly into the past, but the dynamism of its circular time is achieved in the poem through various metaphors that emphasize floating up and down. For example, this line, a grey cloud floated down, and falling also. dust kept falling, diamond coals falling. This oscillation of bright diamonds, for example, and dark, coal, evening, and so on, and of transformation, for example, the cutting wood, the eyelid flicker, or the bird which becomes the bihag. This is all the idea of the union of opposites that I'm talking about. So as mentioned, the Kalpadruma refers to the mythological Kalpataru, which is one of the 5 trees of heaven or of Indra's paradise in Hindu mythology. And this tree is supposed to fulfill desires. In some areas, the tree is identified with the banyan, or a fig tree, whose seeds germinate in the cracks and crevices of another host tree, creating plant structures that grow on another plant, like bridges between them. No? So again, the image is interesting in relation to our discussion of individuality, but also because it represents eternal life in its seemingly ever-expanding branches. The cutting of wood or branches from this tree refer to the story of the famous Sanskrit poet who was not very intelligent in his young age, but acquired knowledge once he began to cut some of the wood. So this is why in the illustration that we have just seen, we have the hatchet cutting the tree. The term bihag in India, it refers to an evening melody or raga, which in Sanskrit also means color or hue, and also beauty and melody. And a raga uses a series of 5 or more musical notes upon which a melody is constructed, and it is meant to be performed by a particular time, for a particular time of the day or season, and transmitted orally. So in AnjanSen's poem, the gray turns to silver and then to diamonds falling from the sky, and colors turn into imagination, just as the bird turns into music. And we mentioned the intermediate aspects of AnjanSen regarding illustration and painting, but he also he's a musicologist as well. So there's also a lot of influence from music in his poems. I'm going to read Kalpana, imagination, in English, and then you're going to hear the recitation by AnjanSen of his own poem. From the Kalpa began imagination, from the leaves of the Megutta. A grey cloud floated down in front of us. The Kalpadruma shuddered. Gold, silver, dust kept falling. Diamonds, coal, mud kept falling. The eyelid flickered. One bird is flying because of become bihar. A woodcutter was gathering wood from Kalpadruma.
ইমাজিনেশন, কল্পনা। কল্প থেকে শুরু হয়ে গেল কল্পনা। মেঘদূতের পাতা থেকে খুব ধূসর একটা মেঘ ভেসে গেল সামনে দিয়ে। কেঁপে উঠল চোখের পাতা, নড়ে উঠল কল্পদ্রুম। পড়তে লাগলো সোনা, রূপো, ধুলো। পড়তে লাগলো হিরে, কয়লা, কাদা। কেঁপে উঠল চোখের পাতা। বিহঙ্গ এক উঠতে উঠতে বেহাগ হয়ে গেল। একজন কাঠুরে কল্পদ্রুমের কাঠ কাটছিল।
So AnjanSen imagines this poem as a series of continuous images, almost like eye flickers. Birds flying in Indian Puranas, which are myths. Brahma eyelid flickering in a million years, which is a second to him. It is the end of a yuga, or time period. The birds flying are like raga, like music. These are all dreams, imaginations, and open paths to the poet. And this is what he explained to me when commenting on this poem. And there you have some illustrations of the Kalpataru, the tree, the divine tree, being guarded by the mythical creatures here in a Buddhist temple in Indonesia and in Java. So here is another poem that deals also with the clouds of the sky, and again water, mountains, earth, and the gods. No, I'm going to read it. Cloud form. The cloud went after a cloud. Meghnaad also cried like a cloud when he was born. The tired cloud rests on a mountain's breast. A nervous Jasha said, "Go and carry my news." The cloud went stepping over the sky's undertow. Seeing the black cloud, I thought of my dark Krishna. Lady, you got wet in the corner of the courtyard, and your dress oozes and oozes. Pitter patter, pitter patter. I thought of my dark Kali. On the cloud, my heart, and on a tender stage, her frightening face sways. The cloud forms, and it transforms. So in this poem, Cloud Form, AnjanSen uses the image of the cloud as a messenger. And this is already present in the work of the classical Sanskrit writer Kalidasa, whose name means the servant of Kali. Kali is one of the goddesses, which is very much worshipped in the area of Kolkata and West Bengal and even Bangladesh. The cloud forms and transforms. So Meghnaad refers to the sound of the cloud and brings echoes of Ravana, the king of Rakshasa, in the island of Sri Lanka, who is the chief antagonist of the Hindu epic Ramayana. So Ravana's literal translation from Sanskrit is crying or causing to cry, because he is a demonic creature in Hindu mythology. And Krishna is the 8th incarnation of Lord Vishnu, one of the important deities in the Hindu pantheon. And he was a young prince, often portrayed as Radha's lover. So let me give you a little bit of information about Krishna's story. The main books that discuss Krishna's story are the Mahabharata, the Harivamsa, one of the Puranas, the Bhagavata Purana, and the Vishnu Purana. And Krishna's disappearance marks the end of a period of time known as Yuga and the start of the Kali Yuga, which is the present age, and is dated to February 17 or 18, 3102 before Common Era. So the worship of Krishna, whose etymology means black or dark, and also the protector of the cows, arose in the Middle Ages in the context of the Bhakti movement. We have already mentioned the Bhakti movement. In the Mahabharata and the Puranas, Krishna spends his childhood among young cowherd girls, which were called gopis, in the village of Madhujan, and one of them is Radha, who becomes his friend and lover in a sort of divine sense as well. Radha is almost contemplated as the soul of Krishna, and this idea influenced Carl Jung. Carl Jung studies on archetypes and the division between the anima and the animus. And Jaksa are benevolent nature spirits who are hidden in the earth at the roots of trees. And in Kalidasa's poem, which AnjanSen is being inspired by this poem, the Jaksa narrator, this benevolent natural spirit, is a romantic figure which is talking about love, the love for his missing beloved. No? And clouds, as we've seen, the poem is about clouds, and it's also associated to Krishna's color. He's black, but normally it's painted blue. similar to Kali. Kali is also painted blue in most of the illustrations. You have there some. So a little bit of information about Kali. She's the goddess of time, change, and destruction. Her name means black, but it also means time and death. And Shiva is called Kala, eternal time related to matter, and Kali is Shiva's consort, Sakti or cosmic energy. Kali is mentioned in the Mahabharata as a central figure in late medieval Bengali devotional literature. And in the Devi Durga story, Kali destroys the demon Ratabiya by sucking the blood from his body. And so this is why she also appears in illustrations with bloodshot eyes, her mouth open, and a dropping tongue. Shiva is beneath her feet, representing matter, and Kali is undoubtedly the primeval energy. And apparently during the battle against the demons, Shiva tried to stop her, and he fell among the corpses in the battlefield, and she failed to see his body and stepped on his chest. The depiction of Kali and Shiva shows that without energy, matter lies death. In the tantric context, the tongue denotes the element of energy and action, possibly related to sexual aspects as well. In Tantra, the human body is a symbol of the microcosms of the universe, and the sexual act stands for the creation of the world. So Kali is portrayed mostly in four-armed and turn-arm form, and two of these hands, usually the left, holds a sword and a severed head. And the sword signifies divine knowledge, and the human head signifies human ego, which must be slain by divine knowledge in order to attain moksha, and that is the liberation from samsara, the cycle of death and rebirth. So we're coming to the end of this lecture, and here we have a very short poem by AnjanSen. It's called Village, Gram, and it's about the sadness of migration. Between 2000 and 2005, the Indian government evolved a legal framework that opened the way for private companies to create a hyper-liberalized export enclaves following the Chinese model. And many fertile agricultural lands in India were being taken over by the state and by industrialists, for example, the special economic zones. In March 2007, 14 people were killed and many more were raped and injured by police in West Bengal for refusing to give up their land to a certain petrochemical company. And farmers across the country began to rise against the acquisition of their lands at a low price by the government, transferring them later to private companies. So the uproar led to the cancellation of the project and a temporary moratorium. So the topic of this poem is land speculation, which according to AnjanSen amplifies class and caste inequalities and marginalizes women, impoverishes the rural poor, they are forced to abandon their houses and their previous lifestyles and head into poverty. The poem is called Sorrow, and the name of the character is also Sorrow. So Sorrow's family has left its rundown ancestral home, heading down the path of poverty. The universe will be a village, my dear. There is a certain criticism here of McLuhan idea of the global village, how globalization is destroying ancient forms of life. We have seen how his poems capture a combination of myth, history, folklore, contemporary affairs, as in this one, a certain feeling of nostalgia. When I was asked by AnjanSen to comment on this poem and its illustration by Diana Magajan, I imagined the white cloud as a kind of letter, a walking stick, or a kind of inverted path. Its ghostly quality contrasted strongly with the color red, associated with blood and passion in many cultures. The two black lines that cut across unevenly conveyed the idea of fragmentation, but also the three-dimensionality, just as the black typography of the text. The irony behind the last word, dear, reminded me of McLuhan, as I have mentioned, and the global village. In my unstable position of reader listening who tries to understand a very different culture, a critic who tries to speak and write on something that I don't know very well, a semiotician who tries to discover, I encountered AnjanSen on a visit to India in 2011. His desire to be both author and object of interpretation struck me. I see Anjan as crossing not just the limits of author-critic relationships, but also the boundaries of intertext and of intermediate forms of representation. The dialogue between Sen and his illustrators, between Sen and his readers and critics. It seems to me pregnant with a desire to innovate and cut across intersubjective positions and intercultural differences. He has helped me to discover the India beyond tourist locations, the rich diversity and friendliness of a country that was once the cradle of Western civilizations. So thank you very much for your attention. Thank you very much, Professor Iwasaki. And if you have any questions, please write to me. I will be very, very happy to answer them.